ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another RPG review, this time with Extra Kitty. Hello, Kitty. This is Dexter. Say hello to everybody, Dexter. Yes. Dexter, do you like Sword and Sorcery adventure anthologies? Do you? Well, you better, because that's what we're looking at today. More specifically, we are looking at Morton Bratton's The Spider God's Bride and Other Tales of Sword and Sorcery. This was published by Xoth Publishing in 2008, and as you can imagine, it takes place in the World of Xoth setting that was described in the Player's Guide to the World of Xoth that I covered previously. Seriously, it's free. You should probably be reading that, or if you haven't already. So, this was originally written for 3.5 edition Dungeons & Dragons and covers 10 adventures written for characters between 1st and 10th level. There's also another version, however, which was licensed in 2013 by Mongoose Publishing for their Legend RPG. This was originally their version of RuneQuest before the license for that IP moved on to another company. They kept the system, renamed it a bit, rejiggered a little bit of the contents, and, there you go. So you have two options here. You can go with the original Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 D20 level system, for those who enjoy that kind of thing. Or if you prefer something that works a bit more for Sword and Sorcery right out of the box, the entire RuneQuest D100 family of games is very much what you're looking for in that regard, simply because those ones do Sword and Sorcery just like that. They barely need any kind of modifications except for some essential setting information when you think about it. So beyond the systems, there are a couple of differences between the two editions. First off is obviously the art and presentation. So the art for the 3.5 edition is largely, free open source art. For instance, the cover is a painting by Gustave Doré, so some classical art, which does fit. It is The Slaying of the Prophets of Baal by Gustave Doré. And, well, let's face it, that is entirely in tone for a Bronze Age sword and sorcery setting. Nice camels, somebody getting their heads hacked off with a battle axe, people's spears and such. It's perfectly appropriate for that kind of Mesopotamian, ancient antiquity kind of setting. However, for the art, however, in the Mongoose edition, you're looking at something a bit more polished to it. Okay. No, don't go. Okay. You're looking at something with more polish to it. However, it's less... How should I put this? All the open source for the 3.5 edition, that art is tonally consistent, at least in terms of its art style. You'll see a lot of different, lots of line work done in an old school kind of style, similar to what Gustave Doré did for the illustration that's used for the cover. In the Mongoose edition, the art is a bit more like, professional RPG style artwork. However, there are a couple of different varieties in terms of the art styles, and if I'm not mistaken, I have seen a couple of those pieces being used in previous Mongoose publications. I think principally in the Conan D20 series of books. So there's a bit of recycling going on there. I can't really blame them. Art's expensive to get. But you do see the kind of the little, sometimes a clash of styles in certain ways, but that's a minor point. What's a more important point, however, is the fact that in the 3.5 edition, the maps that you're going to require for, exploration of various dungeon environments are not included in the PDF themselves. They are a separate download off the Xoth publishing website, free of course, naturally. However, as we can imagine, they are not necessarily the same level of polish. For example, here's an example of a manor house or mansion from the titular adventure, The Spider God's Bride. On your left, you'll see the edition from the 3.5 version, and on the right, this is the version that's in the Mongoose book. You can see the difference. There's a lot of the maps for the 3.5 edition that are available that are very much in that, graph paper kind of style versus the more polished ones in the Legend edition. So in terms of map quality, in terms of map presentation, the Mongoose edition wins out in that regard. However, obviously, if you're playing this for Dungeons & Dragons, you're going to want to go for the original edition in any case. There's also one of the adventures here that was translated for Barbarians of Lemuria. I believe that one is called The Vault of Yggdrathotep. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Goddamn Elder Gods. That one was done for the Kickstarter of the Mythic edition of Barbarians of Lemuria, and that was created as a translation of that particular adventure. There are no other ones from this or future publications of the World of Xoth adventures that had that same treatment. I think, yeah, I would like to see a few more of those, actually. I do happen to like Barbarians of Lemuria as a system for, simple rules-light kind of sword and sorcery stuff. But anyway, I digress. So, the initial parts of either of these editions, you're going to see how should I put this? It's all, setting information, rules information, the stuff that has already been shown in the player's guide. So that's largely been superseded in that publication. However, in either case, you're going to see stuff that's more appropriate for the system in hand, whether it's 3.5 or Legend versus the Pathfinder and 5e that we covered previously. So there are a couple of changes. So if we go look at the book itself here, table of contents, and we go look, for instance, at here the characters and such, there are new character classes for the 3.5 edition, the Nomad here, and the Sorcerer, not the regular 3.5 Sorcerer, but one more appropriate for the setting here. And in either case, you've got all the information you need for those. In the Legend version, there isn't as much added in terms of rule sets, simply because the Legend edition covers sword and sorcery right out of the box to their system, so there really isn't that much need to add. There's a couple of extra spells and some tips on how to run a sword and sorcery setting, similar to what you saw in the player's guide. However, there's a lot less of that because you really don't need to change all that much. Just, few new things to the different peoples that we've already seen previously in the last review, as well as, in this case, you've got a whole bunch of new feats for 3.5, cannibalizing, always fun, as well as, different things for the setting and the genre that you would expect. Jaded Reveler. You regularly enjoy boisterous festivities and debauched feasts, usually combined with alcohol and drug abuse. Handy. That kind of thing. As well, of course, the sorcery rules, which do include a couple of modifications for either of the different things. You have, new spells here for 3.5, as well as taint effects. The taint of sorcery is an optional rule in both this and the Legend version. In this case, being tainted via all the terrible, terrible dark magics that you're using, causing some nasty little side effects, ranging from disorientation and mild paranoia all the way to utter megalomania and fits of lunatic paranoia, or an irresistible murderous urges. That's definitely going to come in real handy when you're a squishy wizard and get provoked by some very, very powerful barbarian types, as one can imagine. And we've seen a lot of these new spells also translated to 5e/Pathfinder as well, so nothing really new that we haven't seen before here. What is new are the adventures. This is also stuff we've seen before, equipment. So we start out here with the ranging adventures for here the Necromancer's Knife. Levels from 4 to 6 players of first and second level characters. I'm not going to go into too much detail about all these adventures, simply because there's 10 of them and I'd be here all day, and also because I really want to avoid spoilers, because I really, really think these are worth checking out. If you're into a sword and sorcery adventure done for either D100 style adventures or D20 style RPGs, I think you should be looking into this, getting this. So I'm not going to go into too much detail. Each one of these things, I'm basically going to be showing the outline of how these adventures are being presented, and then show you exactly, giving my impressions of which ones are my favorites, what I like about them, and such as that. So in any case, each one of these adventures is separated via a quick little quote introduction from classic, Weird Tales, Sword and Sorcery authors, of course, as it should be. You get the setting, in this case, city and dungeon. There's a lot of, variety. There's usually a dungeon in each one of these adventures, But there's, some of them take place in cities, others in wilderness, in different environments, desert, jungle, that kind of thing. So there's a good deal of variety in that regard. Gives you the particular levels it's appropriate for. One thing I like is that these ones increase in requirements in terms of, which levels are appropriate for the players as you go along. So this one is for first and second level characters. The next one, the titular Spire God's Bride, is for second and third level, and goes on so forth and so forth until you get to the final one, which is for, ninth and 10th level characters. So you could actually string these along as a form of episodic campaign, inserting your own adventures and other Xoth adventures in between, in order to create a nice little, progression with the same characters going on different adventures, not necessarily related story-wise, but, done in a very episodic feel, much as you have in, classic Sword and Sorcery literature. So each one of these adventures has an introduction showing the kind of situation that's happening. Adventure synopsis. The adventures themselves have a series of events or story points that can be followed at the GM's discretion that basically give you an idea of what can happen. They're not going to tell you what will happen. There's a great deal of sandboxiness to these adventures, allowing you to recreate things from a different angle if the players just don't take the original, take the original story path, which is, very, very good. Future Xoth publications will have more of a focus on that, but you can see the seeds of that here. You have, for instance, the basic locations. You have the different factions or NPCs, all with their own particular wants and needs and, plans, and then you just throw your players into that and it sorts itself out of the table. So, for instance, in the Necromancer's Knife, you have the titular Necromancer's Knife, which is unfortunately tied to the spirit of a dead necromancer who wants payback on his acolytes who shanked him with it. And as you can imagine, you also have different ways of, getting into the adventure synopsis here. That's going to cause problems. If there is one issue with this particular adventure specifically, is that the Necromancer's Ghost in this adventure works via possession, and there's a very good chance of the players actually losing control of their character and getting possessed, in which case I would allow the player in question to keep playing as the actual, possessive necromancer. You give him an idea of what that guy's up to, give him, an idea what his stats are, and have him have that player continue playing as that NPC. Otherwise, you're going to end up with one person coming to the table and not doing anything as their player is getting puppeted around by some dead wizard. Not exactly the most fun. There's also the option, of course, of either getting some kind of exorcism, or what happened is, if they try to get rid of the dagger, having it possess somebody else. That's basically a good way of dealing with that. So, each one of these adventures, you get different cues for how to start the adventure. Different ideas of how they got involved in these events, how they came to the possession of the blade in question, or if they didn't, and if you just want to get them started and having no idea what's going on in classic Sword and Sorcery fashion, there's a little extra chapter here that can be played where they encounter somebody who's trying to get away with the knife and, dies in the process, at which point they get their hands on it. Now, in each of these cases, you're going to have the full stats for all the NPCs as well as stats for the general layout of any dungeons or internal areas where the players are going to be dealing with, through combat and stuff like that. And that is something I like quite a bit. They show you all the standard features, so, unless noted otherwise, all interior doors are good wooden doors, 1 inch thick, hardness 5. These are the 3.5 stats, obviously. Ceiling height is 10 feet in normal rooms and corridors. It gives you an idea of the general disposition of an area, and more importantly, the lighting of an area. If you're trying to play with, for instance, more thiefy characters or stealth-oriented party, knowing this kind of information beforehand is very important, and being able to use that is very useful. There's also quite a few options for how to deal with certain areas. Like, for instance, there's an area here that cannot be accessed except for members of a particular funeral cult and the dead bodies that they're taking in there. These catacombs and the like. So how can PCs gain entry to the catacombs? Killing incapacitated guards. That's a pretty good idea, and it also gives you ideas of what happens when they do try to do that, if they fuck up and, don't manage to do it right, find the secret entrance. For those who knows, there might be one. Infiltrate a funeral procession, sneak into the shrine during a procession. There's the difficulty levels for all those particular skill checks that they might have to make for that. And just, of course, play dead. Just feign death, let the keepers try to take you into their particular catacombs, and hopefully they don't notice that you're still breathing. So that's the kind of thing we're dealing with here. There's a lot of attention to what could happen and how to try to keep things, anticipating player decisions while still keeping things within that same genre. So obviously, if the players do something completely off the wall, it's no way written adventure is ever going to be able to anticipate that. But the author does make a good attempt at figuring that stuff out. So, for instance, you have descriptions of all the rooms with all their contents and things like that. I do like, there's a particular thing here. Let's see if I can see a good example of that. Yeah. So there are certain areas where, for instance, here in the furnace room, there's a 25% chance that 1d2 acolytes are here refilling or cleaning out the furnace. This kind of thing, and this applies also to major NPCs in this location and others, keeps things from feeling lived out. So, for instance, there's that 1 in 4 chance that there's a couple of people there just doing their own business and running around, or, for instance, there's a couple of locations where a main antagonist could be, depending on where he is. And these ones are, for instance, like in the embalming chamber over here, 20% chance of 1 to 4 plus 1 ghouls suddenly emerge from the tunnel when the PCs are there, and 40% chance that this guy Othbanes is present in the room, Othbanes being a major NPC. So he's the master embalmer and corrupt priest. So, yeah, fun guy. Now, if he's there, he's not going to be obviously somewhere else. So it gives it a little bit of a lived-in feeling to the place. The people inside are doing their thing and moving around between areas. So there's no real chance of having characters just, unless they're, have a reason to, just staying stock still in a room, just guarding something for no good reason, except for having the PCs encounter them on cue. That's the kind of thing that you're avoiding through that particular way. It's also an interesting way of doing like very themed random encounters, since it only occurs in certain areas as opposed to just a general wandering monster roll. So it goes into that, gives stats for all the different characters, standard features of things, encounters when there are random encounters, and also, of course, the conclusion to the adventures. So depending on, what happens, how the players deal with it, these are ideas of how to follow up on the adventure, things that, loose ends that could be tied up or that might come back to bite you in the ass. And here's something that I like quite a bit. If the PCs fail, all too many times, adventures for RPGs assume that the players are going to succeed. There's not really much help or ideas given on what happens when your players screw things up and completely foobar themselves. In this case, if the PCs fail to stop the spirit in question, you'll use a possessed body, seek out its former apprentice, gain revenge. Unless the possessed player character intervene, the possessed body must surely perish when the two wizards clash. Yeah, because dead people don't really care about getting their possessed bodies dead, unfortunately. So this is the kind of format of all of these adventures. You have the different events as they take place, the locations, their NPCs that are related to them with all their goings on, and it is very much made for legibility and for usability. You don't have too much in the way of box text giving strong big descriptions. There's some basic stuff, but you ultimately are left with something that's designed to be used at the table rather than just read for pure entertainment, if that makes any sense. However, this is definitely some good idea fodder if you're not interested in running it for its original system. This is easily usable in terms of its just general plot and events and mapping and stuff like that, and encounter types for any other kind of fantasy RPG that you might happen to want to run this with. Although in that case, you are going to have to start making up some stats for yourself. That one goes good. all the adventures, as I said, are very much on that particular format. So Spider God's Bride, the titular adventure. Here you got the same thing, settings wilderness, desert, city, and dungeon, levels for a party of 4 to 6 second to third level characters, and so on and so forth. Each one adventure in this book is presented in those exact kinds of ways, with their own random encounter tables, including not just monsters, but also, like for instance, this one for the Al-Kazi Desert random encounters. You might run into an abandoned campsite. 10% chance of some minor usable trinket on the equipment roll randomly on the equipment table is found with a search check. It's always handy. And keg. One thing I will say about the 3.5 version is that you are going to see a lot of standard 3.5 monsters rather than wholly unique ones. There are some unique creatures that you will encounter, and there is, if we look here at the end, yeah, new monsters, so templates, as well as, new creatures and such as that you are going to be encountering in some of these adventures. So, in essence, you are dealing with 3.5 edition adventures done in an extremely well-described and well-designed way. So, particular favorites for mine, obviously the Spider God's Bride is very much a favorite of mine here. It feels like it's the initial part starts out, builds up with a kind of, escort mission through the wilderness, trying to bring a, caravan to the city of Zulbasir. Only for then to arrive there, and the whole thing turns into a cross between Assault on Precinct 13 and Alien. That should tell you that something. That one can get very, very hectic very quick, especially since you're, second and third level characters. You also have, let's see. Next one, the Jewel of Kadim Bey. This one's interesting. It's got some nice little skullduggery involved that, things when the initial presentation is not always exactly what it seems. So that one is interesting as well. Of the other ones that I've paid particular attention to that really, tickle my fancy, you have also, let's see, which one was it? Yeah, the Vault of Yggdrahotep. This one's a cool, road trip, essentially through deserts and jungles. You have multiple locations as you go through, as you attempt to find the actual vault, as described in the title, with various clues leading to different temples in various cities, jungle, tribal encampments full of, horrible, degenerate, evil tribal people, and their evil necromancer witch queen. That one's fun. And let's see, Swords of Zimbala. This one's kind of fun because it covers one of the interesting things about the setting of World of Xoth is that steel is not only superior to basically the WMD of the era. Steel weapons are very hard to make because only a particular group of people, the Zadjites, have the alchemical knowledge of how to forge steel. They are, fire worshippers, and they're actually very excellent, forgers and blacksmiths. And they jealously conserve the secret of steel. And of course, this adventure involves people trying to steal that secret, so, well, you'll see whose side you're on. Who knows? You might be one trying to help them get stolen, or you might be there trying to protect the secrets. It all depends on who's paying for the best, I guess. Slaves of the Moon is a good one, too. This one takes place in a jungle valley with a lost city. Some, very interesting people living there, and a nice little cursed city-state that they're unable to leave due to an ancient wizard's curse. And there's more to them than meets the eye, as you'll discover if you play this adventure. I'm not going to spoil anything there. I will say this, that if you enter the valley in this adventure, you can't leave until the curse is lifted. So if your players are on their way somewhere and it's important that they get there, you might want to skip this one until a little bit later when they have a bit more time. It's all up to you, really. But, some players might not like the fact that they are stuck there until they can actually fix the problem, if they're more interested in doing something else. After this, we have the next one that really caught my eye. Daughters of Rama's good, but it's basically a dungeon crawl. And you have the Call from the Abyss, which is the seriously high level one. This one, is got some serious Elder God stuff going down for it. So yeah, my favorites in this one were very much Spider God's Bride, Vault of Yggdrasil, Slaves of the Moon, and I also really like, Necromancer's Knife. It's a good little intro for that, and reminds me of one of the old Savage Sword of Conan stories where you had Red Sonja teaming up with Conan for something. Just the way it starts out, where, the adventurer is running into a situation involving an undead wizard that they had no real idea what they were getting themselves into. So yeah, so those are my favorite ones. However, all throughout, these are excellent adventures. This is like a Motorhead album. There are certain tracks that you like better than others, but you can't deny that there's a consistent level of quality throughout the entire set. And that's just, that is my seal of approval right there. So, the Spider God's Bride and Other Tales of Sword and Sorcery. So that's 10, count them, 10 sword and sorcery adventures of excellent quality that I highly recommend checking out if you're interested in running an RPG campaign in that particular milieu. Whether it's the original Dungeons and Dragons version or it's the Mongoose Legends version, either way, I highly recommend looking them up. The 3.5 can easily be adapted to either Pathfinder or 5e, depending on what you're into. There's also some conversion rules on the website for the Mongoose D20, Conan D20 RPG, if you're more into that one. And, obviously these adventures would run perfectly well there, so it's just a question of getting the stats to line up. And as for the Legend RPG version, if you're more interested, such as I am, in, say, for instance, the Mithras system by Design Mechanism, which used to be RuneQuest 6 before they also lost the RuneQuest license back to Chaosium. In this case, the people who worked on Legend are also the ones who worked on that. So really, the conversion crossover is easy in that regard. So you can run it quite easily with either using either one or just any kind of addition to RuneQuest. Really, it's easily adaptable. So I highly recommend looking into this one. It's not particularly expensive. The PDF is available on the Xoth.net website or also on DriveThruRPG, obviously. And it won't set you back very far. You can also get the printed copy on Lulu. The links are all on the Xoth.net publishing website. So I'm going to be looking into the other adventures in this series at some point. Probably going to, cover some other RPG stuff, and just so I don't, become a one-trick pony with these reviews. But yes, I highly recommend taking a look at this and other Xoth.net publishing products, because if you're like me and more or less completely obsessed with sword and sorcery stuff, it is very much, it's among the highest quality stuff you're going to find out there, really. It's well done. It's quality adventures that really capture that particular genre's essence in a way. I don't really know how to describe it when you think about it like that. It's just like they feel right for sword and sorcery. That's really the highest praise I can give for these kinds of adventures. So until next time, when we cover something else, hopefully not just Xoth stuff, but I'm thinking of covering some of the more stuff that, for instance, for Mithras, the Monster Island setting, that is a particularly good sword and sorcery thing that I definitely wanted to cover at some point. But regardless, I will be seeing you all next time for more videos. You can like the video if you like it, subscribe if you want to see more, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.